Well, good morning. Great shame not to be seeing everybody in person, and quite a reflection, isn't it, that a year on from this way of working. But really, to follow on Alan, there's been a lot of progress in the year despite the difficulties. And what I'd like to do today is go through a presentation some of you might have seen and others won't have, that just looks at some of the issues facing salmon particularly, but I'll touch also on some other freshwater species and some possible solutions and ways that we can move forwards. So salmon are widely distributed throughout Scotland, as you know, and salmon stocks are on a downward trajectory. The top line here shows the estimated numbers of salmon returning to the coasts of Scotland. The lower line shows the estimated number of spawners, and you can see that for many years, although there was a decline in fish returning to the coast, there was still a good stable spawning stock, largely because there was reduction in coastal netting, allowing more fish to escape to fresh waters. But there's very little in the way of netting now, and you can see that the two lines are very much converging now on a downward trajectory. Show you some of the latest data from our trap sites on the upper River Dee, the Gurnock and the Baddock Burns, and these are sites where we have traps that intercept adults coming up to spawn and smolts going out to sea. And if you look at the data on the left for the Gurnock burn, you can see that the most recent return of females was the lowest on record. And similarly with the Baddock, we're at very low levels. So I'm afraid still strong indications that things are not improving for salmon. And it's not just numbers of fish, it's the size of fish that has declined. And this is particularly important because the numbers of eggs in each female salmon depend on the size of the fish. So fewer fish and smaller fish has a big effect on numbers of eggs. So some key facts, looking at those trends, time may be short to act meaningfully for salmon. So it's a real imperative to act. Climate change seems to be a general driver of decline. There's some good evidence now that changes on the high seas have not been helpful for salmon, but there are many other factors as well that affect salmon. And we probably haven't identified all of the factors that are relevant. So, for example, there's a lot of interest in reduced insect life and effects of agricultural chemicals that are difficult to tease out. The salmon are really a cold water fish. So if we have general warming, what chance is there? Well, we shouldn't abandon hope. Things are obviously changing on the high seas, and if they continue to change, they might favour salmon more. Animals can adapt, evolve, but only within limits. Climate change may be brought more under control, and we should also keep an open mind that although there are indicative correlations that suggest climate change being a big driver, that there are other factors as well that might well be having effects that we haven't identified yet. So a general strategy, we can protect and enhance numbers and quality of salmon smolts leaving Scottish waters. And so the more we can do to produce smolts going out, the more we can compensate for the declines on the high seas. And we need to work out more clearly just what is happening to fish leaving Scotland. And we're doing quite a lot of work with Norwegians who have a very active programme in the North Atlantic. So I think, as Alan was mentioning, this really needs to be a joint effort amongst regulators. SEPA have a big role to play in terms of looking after water quantity and quality, and SNH have a role to play, for example, in licensing bird predation control. And of course, the various industries in Scotland also have huge potential to help and make a difference here. One important issue is to try and support progress as much as possible by good science, by hard science. And to give you an example here, one of the effects of climate change will be changes in water flow, and it's when one sees the volume of water coming down some of the Scottish rivers, one can't help but think that's going to have a strong negative effect on salmon. But this recent paper from Ross Glover and Ian Malcolm's team indicates that things aren't always as they seem. By using the Gurnick-Burn system, where we could monitor in great detail the population dynamics, the outcome was that despite some really high flows that were actually smothering that trap I showed you earlier with boulders, there was no evidence of negative effects on juvenile abundance. Salmon seem to be very capable of finding ways to survive those very high flows. So this is just an example of how important it is to try and keep the science going to inform judgments. So what additional responses can we enact? Well, protecting habitats from climate change, particularly in the freshwater, is an important potential way forward. To try and increase the numbers of smolts and the quality of smolts going to sea, if that's possible, as I mentioned earlier, is really important. And to look for ways of reducing losses from predators and parasites, particularly at the smolt stage, where there's no real what's called compensation potential. So how can we go about this? Well, protecting from climate change using trees as living parasols. We know from work bringing data collected by a lot of the boards and trusts as part of the Scottish River Temperature Monitoring Network. We know that we can identify areas that are well treed and that the temperature is good for salmon, but equally areas that could do with a lot more shade. And this isn't just for salmon. I think this is where other species comes in. If we're going to try and mitigate some of the climate change effects, then we need to be looking at an ecosystem level within streams and rivers. And of course, putting in riparian vegetation chimes very much with rewilding efforts on a broader scale. And you can see the sorts of needs that we're developing at the bottom there. And we've had some good progress here. We've got in review a paper that sort of sets out, if you like, planting potential tool. This can use information that's coming through the River Temperature Monitoring Network, and using combining that with process modelling, we can map where to put trees as a priority, which obviously is important. We don't want to be treating areas that are already moderate temperatures. We want to be putting where they can have biggest effect. So how do we actually generate more or better quality smolts? One area that we've been looking at over the last decade is using nutrient enhancement. This is a method that's been used in America with some success. So if you can increase the nutrient status of depauperate upland areas that have suffered with nutrient being taken out, then there's a potential to restore the quality for salmon smolts. This at the moment is at the experimental stage. We need to make sure that it can be done without doing damage. And there's a program going up with the Cromarty Fisheries Board and Glasgow University at the moment, looking further at how this can be taken forwards. Very important that this isn't done willy-nilly. There's potential for damage, so it must be done in a way that's going to be positive, probably an adaptive management approach where one can monitor the effects of nutrient additions and reduce if necessary. This graph just gives you an indication. This is the condition of smolts and the chances of them coming back from sea. And you can see that if you've got better quality smolts, which might be achieved through additional nutrients, then it can massively increase return rates. In fact, theoretically, by improving smolt number and quality, one could largely negate the effects that we've monitored at sea so far. So this has huge potential in some of the nutrient poor areas of Scotland. Then another approach to control impacts of predators, parasites, and pollution. There's clearly a lot of interest in impacts of sea lice and a lot of ongoing discussions there. Very important that we work with our colleagues in industry, see how we can find solutions that work for wild salmon as well as industry. And indeed, it was about just before, it must have been the week before last year, I was at the last of the salmon interactions working groups, where we debated long and hard the potential for better methods of controlling sea lice. And similarly with predators, some very exciting work going on. Marine Scotland has contracted out SMRU to have a look at the potential for developing cross-river seal deterrents to effectively just keep the predators away from areas where fish are particularly vulnerable. So there's some good potential progress there. But very difficult to find solutions for regulating predator impact that are acceptable. There's obviously a lot of interest in conservation of predators. Common seals, for example, are in decline along the east coast of Scotland. So there are a lot of changes, and it's difficult to find good management solutions that will work across the board. But some interesting questions, as Alan alluded to. How do we prioritise actions across regions? What are the perceived pressures? And what are the known pressures, the known impacts? So actually trying to bring in enough science to test the general assumptions is very important, but equally we need to act quickly. So adaptive management that I mentioned earlier is a very important tool here. We have to act, but we have to monitor that action and be prepared to modify the actions as necessary. So we've been really pleased with working with the fisheries trusts and boards across Scotland. We've had some very successful, exciting programs, such as the National Electrofishing Programme, and we're keen to build on that. We've worked with Alan last year to try and get some large-scale funding coming in to continue this, and we're just waiting to hear outcomes of proposals to try and develop 3 areas. We want to get across Scotland adult salmon scale monitoring exercise. We've looked at the size and condition of adult salmon coming back to Scotland using net fisheries in the past, but of course this isn't an option, except there's one fishery on the Tweed. So we want to extend this to try and use rod-caught fish. So that's something I'm hoping we'll be bringing forwards. We'd really like to get the National Electrofishing Programme for Scotland continuing, and on the back of that to look at introgression, just to see how much introgression there actually is. This is where genes from escaped farm salmon, and in some cases stocked salmon, that are not native to an area become part of the gene pool through hybridization. And then finally, to mention another couple of large-scale developments that have moved forwards, the West Coast smolt tracking project, which you'll be hearing a lot about in detail elsewhere, I'm sure, is starting this spring, which is really, really exciting. And this complements some of the work we're doing further inshore, looking at dispersion of salmon and sea trout smolts. And we're continuing with some projects to try and expand the salmon counter network. So work will be recommencing on the River Aire for a fish counter there. And we've been talking with the ESCS board to look at helping with a counter on the South Esk. So we're very much hoping that these initiatives will grow. And on the back of the salmon strategy, we will have an extensive network across Scotland, bringing these important data in to inform direct management actions, and very much a link there between the local fisheries boards and trusts and other operators in the universities and Marine Scotland. So it's been a difficult year, but it's been productive to some extent. We've made some significant progress, and looking forward to things improving and working with you going forwards. Thank you very much.